So you may already recognize these green streaks of algae on Manitow Lake. Maybe you saw them on a lake trip, or maybe you forgot to clean your fishbowl. What we're looking at is known as a harmful algal bloom. This is when certain photosynthetic bacteria multiply by the billions. About 60% of these blooms produce toxic byproducts, which were the cause of death for 3 dogs in New Brunswick just last year. It's because of this high risk to pets, children, and the rest of us that blooming recreational lakes are rendered completely unusable. They pose an extreme risk to fish and wildlife, and to make matters worse, if a bloom occurs in a water supply, those toxins can't be removed by traditional water treatment. And guess what? If you opened a tap in Halifax today, that water came from a lake. Harmful algal blooms have been a persistent issue in recent decades, especially in urban and agricultural areas. But recently, reports have been growing to include more remote locations and places like Manitow Lake that don't actually have a strong history of algal blooms, but then went ahead and bloomed with extraordinary intensity. And that kind of unpredictability is terrifying, because it's like our lakes are in a horror movie and we just don't know who's next. So we really need to understand the causes of these harmful algal blooms in order to better predict and prevent them from happening. And one of these main causes is an increase of a nutrient called phosphorus from human activity. Now that simple explanation is great, but it doesn't always explain our horror movie lakes. Some other things that can help cause these things include precipitation and water temperature and period of ice coverage. And these can all be influenced by climate change. Now, for me to understand this climate and lake relationship, I'd need water quality data for at least the past 30 years. But luckily, that's not a problem, because our lakes have kept a detailed record of what exactly has changed within the water and its watershed for hundreds of years. Eroded soil, algae, everything we put into our lake systems all accumulates at the bottom, forming a sediment archive. So just like rings on a tree, lakes have layers. And when I take a core of sediment out from a lake, I could have a story that starts in 1869 at the bottom and goes all the way to present day at the top. And I want you to think about how much of our history is written in that old mud, and what a powerful tool that is. Because I can use indicators for things like algae production, climate, and human activity to reassemble the history of environmental change at Manitow Lake. And from there, we can assess how this huge global phenomenon of climate change is influencing these algae bloom events in our very precious lake resources. Thank you.